first of all, thanks very much for the welcome, and I know that I'm the only thing between you and lunch, so the fact that you're still here is nothing short of a miracle, so thanks very much for being here today. As you said, I went from government to working for the private sector. I'm now with Microsoft, and I'm absolutely delighted and also proud to be with you today and talk a little bit about the topics of the Paris Cyber Week. I don't have to remind you, of course, that what we're talking about here is tech sovereignty, it's misinformation, as we just heard, IoT and data, the Green Deal, but also skills. And I think those are the topics that are absolutely essential when we look at the world today, but certainly also for a company like Microsoft. And you could argue, I would say, that these were topics of key importance before the global pandemic, but as we look across Europe and indeed across the world, we are in a situation where all of these topics, for good reasons, but unfortunately also for challenging reasons, are more important than ever before. I noticed that President Macron, in his conversation with Niklas Zennström, said that when you look at the global map, you have the GAFAs in the US, you have the BATs in Asia and China, and then you have GDPR in Europe. And I think that actually is a very nice reminder of both the opportunities in Europe, but also some of the challenges we face in Europe. Because I do think that we have a shared obligation, a shared responsibility to try and build Europe better and to make sure that Europe comes out of the crisis with more opportunities, not least in the area that we are dealing with, digitalization and technology. But I think where Europe is already a global superpower is not least on the regulatory front. And GDPR is, of course, the example par excellence in this area. And I think it sends a very strong signal, both of the opportunities in Europe, but perhaps also where we need to team up and bring Europe forward. I think Europe's sort of diverse regulatory and policy agenda has really sparked, I would say, almost a global movement. I had the opportunity to live in Silicon Valley for 3 years. And I actually remember very clearly in the beginning of my posting there that GDPR was not a very popular topic among the US technology companies. In fact, when you mentioned GDPR, you were often shown quite quickly towards the exit door. That has completely changed with GDPR, and I think when we look at the regulatory agenda moving forward, I think Europe will continue to set not only the direction for Europe, but in fact set the direction across the world. Looking at the world here in the beginning of June 2021, this is my first physical meeting in more than 10 months, and it's in many ways fantastic to be here with you today. But of course, the troubles and the challenges of COVID-19 is far from over, as many other speakers have mentioned today. But as we look back in the last 14, 15 months, I think there are two things that come out clearly. One is the dependency we've had on technology, including the technology that Microsoft is providing, as well as many other companies. It is difficult to imagine a mitigation of a global pandemic like COVID-19 without access to the technologies that we have today, whether it's Teams or Zoom. We would not have been able to educate our children. Many of us would have had many more difficulties keeping our jobs. And I think the number of unemployed people and the contraction of the economy would probably be much higher than what we've seen. But I think, not least standing here in Europe, it has also shown the dependency on technology, and let's be honest, also the dependency on foreign technology. And it has raised, and I want to be honest with you today, I think for good reasons, concerns about the dominance of big technology companies, including the one that I represent, and the necessity of Europe to move ahead and develop Europe's own skills in this area. And I think when you combine that with the cyber security attacks, that of course is a main topic of the Paris Cyber Week, that is a risky cocktail where the trust and the reliance in technology has had hard hits. And you know, the motto we have in my company is technology runs on trust. But when I speak to friends and families, I think looking back over the last 14, 15 months has certainly also increased mistrust and concerns about the dependency on the technology that we build. And it has, of course, also led to an increase around the digital sovereignty discussion or the strategic autonomy discussion across Europe. And standing here in Paris, in France, I want to be honest in also saying that, of course, Paris plays a significant role in this discussion, not only in France, not only across Europe, but across the world. And I think it's one of the key topics today. I think the traditional reaction to digital sovereignty, not least from the technology industry, has been to dismiss it and to be deeply skeptical about what sovereignty in the digital area actually means. I think that's the wrong approach. That's not the approach that we want to take in Microsoft. I think what we want to do is acknowledge that there are valid and legitimate reasons why you have a digital sovereignty discussion on the rise in Europe. Because this is fundamentally about Europe's ability to be in control. This is, as Commissioner Vestager has put it, about regulatory sovereignty, about Europe's ability to make its own decision at a key moment in history where technology is playing a key role. But it's certainly also a concept where I think Europe has an obligation to get this right. Don't want to go too far back in history, but I would actually argue if you look at the European Union as a political project going back to the Second World War, or perhaps even going back all the way to the Westphalian peace treaties, the European project has always been about adapting the sovereign concept to the particular time and the particular challenges that we are facing. And I think Europe has a unique opportunity to get the digital sovereignty discussion right. Because again, let's be honest, if you travel in Europe, I'm pretty sure that you will get at least 27 different interpretations of what digital sovereignty means. And I think there is a real desire, but also a real need to get the right balance here to make sure that Europe is fully in control, but that Europe will also remain loyal to the history of being open to everybody who wants to play by the rules that Europe is setting down. One of the reasons why we think that the digital sovereignty discussion is relevant is, of course, how we can make that fit for the digital age. And there are three fundamental reasons I think that should be part of how we look at the digital sovereignty discussion. And I'll pose them as slightly provocative questions, but I would argue that there can be no digital sovereignty without economic opportunity and without global competitiveness. Secondly, I would also argue that there can be no digital sovereignty without cybersecurity, as we've also seen in the previous discussions here today. And last but not least, which I think is an important message also to us in the industry, there really cannot be digital sovereignty without a continued commitment to the rule of law and trustworthy technology. So I think achieving an appropriate balance really relies on regulation that enables and strengthens the digital single market, but also the freedoms and the values that we have in Europe, and that allows EU businesses, small and big, to succeed in an increasingly competitive global market. And that brings us to, I think, the topic of the Paris Cyber Week, of course, the upcoming presidency of France of the European Union. And as others have said, it is in many ways crunch time for Europe and for the European Union and for the value-based leadership. And all of these regulations, this wave of regulations we're seeing coming forward, in many ways and in many areas are culminating during the French presidency of the European Union. We're seeing regulations coming forward on cybersecurity. We recently saw the new proposal on AI regulation. We have regulation on sustainability. We have regulation on data. All of them are critically important, not least to the business that I'm in, but I think to most businesses across Europe. No sector will be unaffected. Technology and digitalization will transcend all areas. And I guess it would be appropriate for me to say that you can rest assured that in the industry we have understood clearly that regulation is coming and more regulation is coming. We welcome that, and we want to engage in a constructive way with European decision makers to get this right. And in many ways, I think the French presidency of the European Union has a unique opportunity to really drive Europe forward in the right manner. I think when we look back at Brexit, we have lost a country in the European Union very focused on digitalization and technology. And I think that vacuum is now being picked up, not least by France, but by other European countries. And I think we now have a unique, but also a historic opportunity to get the regulatory framework around digitalization and technology right. But it's not easy, it's not a done deal. I think it requires all of us, including in the industry, to work close together with decision makers. And I took note of the presidency pillars, bridging tech regulation with the ambition to grow a stronger European tech industry and to make sure that we have an approach that we not only understand, but also embrace in the industry, including in Microsoft. And I will also tell you that this is actually a set of priorities that resonates extremely well with the business that we operate. We see ourselves as providing the critical infrastructure and the productivity tools that enables all businesses in Europe to prosper and reap the full benefits of the digital economy. And I know there is a lot of focus on startups. I also know that next week there is another event here in Paris that will be very much focused on the startups. And I actually remember visiting Station F a few years ago and the vibrant startup environment that existed there. And it's also one of the reasons why we in Microsoft are supporting more than 350 startups in France, particularly in the fields of healthcare, energy, and also retailing. It's another important area influenced by French leadership when we look at the area of disinformation, as we just heard the discussion before. And I really want to call out the creation of an agency dedicated to counter misinformation attempts as a strong sign of the commitment to secure not only the French presidential elections, but also to attribute malicious interference and prevent political destabilization of cyberspace. I think that is a particular priority in France in view of the political agenda, but I think this is a universal necessity that we need to focus on across the world. And last but not least, it would be inappropriate for me here in Paris not to mention, of course, the leadership role that France has had in creating and focusing on the norms in cyberspace, the traffic rules in cyberspace, not least with the Paris Call and the creation of the Paris Call community, which we in Microsoft are very proud to partner up on and which continues to be a very high priority for us in Microsoft. Now, this will come as a shocking surprise for you that a representative from a US technology company will say a few words towards the end about the transatlantic relationship and the importance of the transatlantic relationship. But I am, as you can hear from my heavy accent, a European with a capital E, but I also represent a US technology company. But I believe with both hats on that we have to make sure that we defend, that we enhance, that we revitalize the transatlantic relationship at a moment where we've had some difficult years behind us, but also as a moment where we need to focus on the shared values that unites us, not only the areas where we have slight disagreements, but we also need to do that in view of the global challenges that exist and where there is a natural partnership between the US and Europe. And only a few days from now, we will have the EU-US summit with the participation of President Biden. And what we hear from sources, let's say on both sides of the Atlantic, is that there is some positive momentum that we might see a positive outcome of the summit, not least in the areas of technology and digitalization. And I think that's something we need to welcome. It's something we in the industry need to build on and participate and contribute and support the best we can. And just a few weeks ago when we saw the EU AI regulation coming out of the European Commission, I'm sure you also took note of the fact that the National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, actually went out commenting on a draft piece of EU regulation, welcoming this and saying we need to work together also on the regulatory agenda to make sure that we develop trustworthy AI. I think it's a small example of a potential renaissance in the transatlantic partnership, and who knows, perhaps even a renaissance in further collaboration around the regulatory agenda. Let me then finish up so that you can have your lunch by saying a few words about how all of this looks for the industry and for a company like Microsoft. I think the fundamental thing to mention from the outset here is that we have to look at our own mindset, we have to look at our own approach vis-a-vis Europe. We have a critical role to play, I think. I think the technologies we develop, the technologies we deploy, has been absolutely essential looking back at a very, very challenging global pandemic. But we also know as we move into an increasingly digitalized economy that those same technologies are going to be essential no matter what industry, no matter what public sector that you represent. So we want to be part of Europe, we want to support Europe, we also want to support the recovery of Europe. But we also understand that it is not Europe that needs to adapt to the technology we develop and deploy. It is the other way around. We have to adapt our technology to Europe. both to the policies of Europe, but also to the regulatory framework of Europe, but also to what our customers are telling us, what our customers are concerned about. Our response to that is a policy we call Tech Fit for Europe, which is of course a direct response to the European Commission's vision of a Europe fit for the digital age. But it is more than just a headline. It is really an approach where we want to double down on making sure that we will become a trustworthy partner also for Europe in the next decade. We want to play by the rules. We want to make sure that we help in a constructive way with what Europe wants to do. And I think there are two areas that are particularly important here on top of productivity. One is connectivity. We need to make sure that we reduce the digital divide, the gap in connectivity. That is a massive problem on the global stage, but even in Europe, even in countries in Europe, it is one of the main issues that we're dealing with today. And the second thing, I think, is one area where the Paris Cyber Week is already helping us, is develop the skill sets of tomorrow. And those skill sets are unfortunately not there, and unfortunately this is one of the areas where we see also Europe trailing behind, including at the global level. We've initiated in Microsoft a global skilling initiative, and as of today we've had 1.4 million people in France go through our skilling opportunities and develop the skill sets of tomorrow. That's not the end of it. This will be a continued effort and continued challenge, and we think that we need to bring the public sector and the private sector together to make sure that we have the skill sets for tomorrow. But we also have to make sure that we invest in the next generation of techies. And one thing that we are particularly proud of here in France is that back in 2018 we established the Microsoft AI School in France, which is an offer of degrees recognized by the French Ministry of Employment. And since the launch of this new initiative, we've had more than 400 job seekers go through the training, including back-to-work approaches with 24 schools across the country involved in bringing the skills of tomorrow forward. Let me finish by saying, what does Tech Fit for Europe means in practice? Well, I've alluded to it already. It really means aligning us to the debates, the concerns, the approach in Europe in a fundamental way. And this is something we are going to invest in, and we have been investing in already. In my view, there are three ways we're going to do this in the next couple of months, in the next couple of years, but certainly also during the French presidency of the European Union. First of all, we're going to contribute constructively and also transparently to the regulatory and policy discussions in the European Union. We're not dismissing the need for regulation, we're welcoming the need for regulation, not least in areas of high risk, whether this is about digital safety or about the potential misuse of artificial intelligence, just to mention a couple. The second thing we need to do is to continue to focus on ensuring and further developing a responsible business model. A key part of our responsibility is to support EU efforts to support global competitiveness and to promote local economic opportunities. And our business is built on the fact that we're supporting our customers, we're not competing with our customers, we don't use the data of our customers. That is the foundation for our approach, and we think that is particularly well aligned with the European agenda. The third thing we want to do is really to work with our own engineers and our own developers to constantly upgrade, develop trustworthy technology that is fit for Europe. We recently launched what we call the EU data boundary, which, due to a massive investment in Europe with more than 14 data center regions coming online or already being online, the ability for us to offer to our customers the opportunities to store but also to process all data in the European Union. This is a small example of us developing Tech Fit for Europe, but it's also an example of us listening very carefully to the discussions that we have across Europe. We'll continue to do that. We're not at the end of it. We believe that time is an opportunity for us to double down and invest even more in Europe. Our foundation is we want to be a trusted partner that continues to help make Europe fit for the digital age. That was it. Lunch is up next. Thank you for being so patient with me today. I appreciate the opportunity. Thanks a lot.